Hi everybody, Donkey Storm here, bringing you another Shadowlands spec video, and today we're going to be talking about the Assassination Rogue. I know I just did Outlaw Rogue, but since it felt like that spec is still coming together and less than a sure thing at the moment, I wanted to bring you a video on a spec that I feel a little more confident about going into Shadowlands, and that's Assassination. Assassination has been a solid spec and often the go-to spec for raiding for some time now, and after looking at the Shadowlands changes, I don't really see another reason that would change. In this video we'll go over the changes coming to Assassination in Shadowlands and some of the general strengths of the spec, and I'll tell you why I think it's probably the safest bet for those of you looking to main a rogue in Shadowlands, at least for the moment. As always, I want to preface this by saying that it's still too early to say what classes are going to simply output the most DPS upon release, as numbers tuning usually goes right down to when the expansion is released. Instead, I'm just going to give you reasons that I think Assassination will be a well-rounded, viable, and fun spec to play, especially for people who already enjoy it. Before I get started, if you enjoy this video, please toss it a like and check out some of my other videos, and subscribe to see more of my content down the line. Alright, let's get into Assassination. So what's changing for Rogue in Shadowlands? Like all classes, a whole bunch of abilities that used to be spec-specific are becoming baseline for all rogues. This includes Poisons, Ambush, Cheap Shot, Evasion, Eviscerate, Fleet-Footed, Kidney Shot, Riposte, Rupture, and Slice and Dice. The Alacrity talent is also becoming available to all specs. I think the most impactful ones here for Assassination are Slice and Dice, which increases attack speed and is definitely a buff we'll want to spend combo points on to keep up full time, and Shiv, an ability that increases your nature damage done to the target as well as applies a special version of your non-lethal poison, adding some utility to the spec and the ability to dispel enrages. As for talents and abilities, there are really only some minor changes to speak of. Toxic Blade has been removed as a talent and replaced with the Alacrity talent. Crimson Tempest sees a slight damage buff and becomes one of the only AoE spells in the game without a target cap. And the Blindside talent, which saw basically zero use in BFA, now allows for a chance to use Ambush out of stealth and becomes possibly a viable talent. How will this affect Assassination Rogue gameplay? Well, to be honest, not much. Spec is still going to be all about maintaining Rupture, Garrote, and your poisons on your target, while spending your excess combo points on Envenom and having huge burst potential with Vendetta. Shiv essentially takes the place of Toxic Blade and actually brings a little bit more to the table, the added bonus of an Enrage Dispel. Toxic Blades does still exist though, and now serves to reduce the cooldown for Shiv. If Blindside ends up becoming the go-to talent, we'll also need to use Ambush out of stealth as well. I think the biggest gameplay change we'll see is the necessity of keeping up Slice and Dice. When all our stats go back to square one at the beginning of the expansion, particularly our haste and energy regen, it'll be interesting to see how difficult it is to maintain all your bleeds and Slice and Dice, as well as get off some Envenoms. I like these changes overall, as I felt like Assassination in BFA felt kinda naked, with few buttons to press, especially after losing Kingsbane from Legion. One potential exciting thing about this change is that I can see Shadowlands as a buff to Assassination's biggest weak point, AoE. With almost every class getting a target limit put on their AoE abilities, but Crimson Tempest and Hidden Blades not having that, maybe we'll finally see Assassination become more competitive on the AoE front. Of course, we'll need to see further testing and damage numbers before we can know that for sure. So with all that said, what are the strengths of Assassination Rogue and why would you want to play one? First of all, Assassination is typically known as a single-target powerhouse. With Vendetta, the Master Assassin talent, and Vanish, Assassination is capable of huge single-target bursts every couple of minutes. Since the core playstyle seems mostly similar, there's no reason to think this is going to change drastically in Shadowlands. With one target to focus on, it's pretty easy to maximize your bleed uptime and use your cooldowns effectively. So if you like being able to pump big DPS into a single target, Assassination might be your jam. Another strength is extended Cleave fights, or what we sometimes call council fights, with 3-ish targets. You really get to see how the dot playstyle shines when you're spreading them across multiple targets and learning to keep them going, and use your cooldowns effectively. It's definitely one of the things that separates the mediocre rogues from the good ones. In my opinion, this is probably the best and most rewarding part of playing Assassination Rogue, so if you like the idea of spreading your bleeds around, watching the damage numbers fly, maybe you'd enjoy it too. Assassination also brings a ton of utility to the table in PvE. You've got CC in Sap and Blind, stuns in the form of Kidney Shot and Cheap Shot, threat management from Tricks of the Trade, the ability to skip mobs in dungeons using Shroud of Concealment, and now with Shiv, the ability to dispel enrages as well. You've got a ton of mobility with Sprint and Shadow Step, which you can use on friendly or enemy units. You have a crazy amount of defensives, a magic immunity in Cloak of Shadows, Crimson Vial to heal yourself, which is also going to have a new interaction with Pickpocket to make it even more impactful in Shadowlands. Feint to avoid AoE damage, Evasion to avoid melee attacks, and now Riposte as well with the new changes. Oh, and don't forget, when all that fails, you're usually talented into Cheat Death as well. There really isn't much a rogue can't do from the DPS role. Sounds great, right? What about weaknesses? Well, as I mentioned before, AoE encounters, especially ones with many mobs that don't live a long time, is really tough as Assassination, as you just don't have time to let your bread and butter, your dots, build up and do their thing. And having mained Assassination for much of Legion and BFA, I can tell you, it's kind of sad watching other classes go off to the races on large pulls while you sit there praying for a big poison bomb proc. I'm cautiously optimistic that we might see some improvement in this area, with so many other classes getting target limits put on their AoE spells and Assassination not yet getting that. Time will tell if this turns out to be somewhat of an indirect buff to Assassination, or if this will continue to be a weakness of the spec. Also, because of the nature of dots, target switching can be an issue for Assassination, especially since your biggest cooldown, Vendetta, only affects the target you cast it on. Finally, when our stats go back down from the godlike levels of BFA 8.3, especially Haste, and this happens at the beginning of every expansion, Assassination feels very slow. We typically lack the energy regen to make the spec feel fluid until we get some gear. Like most dot specs though, Assassination tends to scale very well as expansions go on, so if you're playing the long game, that should be encouraging to you. All in all though, as an Assassination main in BFA 8.3, I'm pretty happy with what I see here. I don't think Assassination needed a major overhaul, so I'm glad it didn't get one. I'm hopeful that the spec gets a couple more interesting abilities to use to up the overall pace a bit, and a buff in the AoE department would be nice as well. As I've mentioned, it's too early in the alpha to know raw DPS numbers, but Assassination has been a really reliable spec for a long time, and it's looking like the safest pick for rogues right now, with Outlaw getting some pretty big changes and Subtlety still a work in progress. If you liked the playstyle before, there's really no reason you wouldn't like it now. So that's going to pretty much do it for my Assassination Rogue video. If you enjoyed it, you might want to check out some of my other Shadowlands videos linked in the description. And I'd always appreciate a sub if you want to see more of what's to come. I appreciate the request. I'll try and do as many as I can, but I am focusing on classes and specs I'm most familiar with because I feel like it'd be disingenuous of me to do a class I'm not at least decently familiar with. Anyway, this has been Donkey Storm. Stay safe and enjoy the countdown to Shadowlands.